Habits of Happiness is sponsored and hosted by the Mindful Life program. The Mindful Life program helps people engage in life in healthy and meaningful ways, reducing stress while cultivating genuine happiness. They offer programs locally, internationally, and online. More information at www.mindfullifeprogram.org or 970-633-0163.
Habits of Happiness is also sponsored by Paradise Bakery, located in the heart of Aspen on the corner of Galena and Cooper. A favorite hangout since 1981. Famous for fresh-baked cookies and muffins, serving homemade Italian-style ice cream, lattes, and fine coffees. Open daily from 6:30 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Hello and welcome to Habits of Happiness. My name's John Bruna.
And I'm Laura Bartels, and together we run the Mindful Life program in Carbondale, Colorado. And we offer mindfulness programs throughout the United States, Canada, and with our colleague and co-founder in Australia.
We'd really like to take a moment to thank GrassRoots Television for hosting this program, as well as our sponsors. They're really helping to make this opportunity for us to bring our work to you and to really see if we can help people cultivate genuine happiness in their own life. This program came as a result of really a vision of the work that we do in mindfulness. When we started working with mindfulness with people and looking at the source of suffering and anxiety that so many people in our culture have, we really found that mindfulness was a key to really unlock this inner happiness and well-being that people often overlook. And so with that in mind, we were presented with the idea of offering this program in which we're hoping to really unpack and explore what is this thing we call happiness and how can we truly cultivate the habits that lead to general and healthy well-being in our life.
And in the program, in the episodes coming up, we'll be looking at the myths of happiness, the science of happiness, and really bringing to you some habits that you can use in your own life to cultivate happiness and really find more meaning in your life.
So let's get right to it. When you think about happiness, one of the biggest questions we need to get to is, what is it when we talk about happiness? What is this definition of happiness? Right now, I know there's a lot of research and science in which they're trying to measure that.
Yeah, but what's interesting is, it's not that recent that there was not a big focus on happiness in research, but now we do find universities and centers focused on this question: what is happiness, and can we cultivate more of it in our own life?
Yeah, so much of our Western psychology has really been based and focused on depression and suffering, and you have the DSM to really look at all and categorize the levels and degrees of mental illness. And it's really only recently that we started to look at what are the measurements of happiness and how can we cultivate that in our life.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's come out of that research is really asking this question, what is happiness, and trying to define it. I think one of the current definitions from a researcher named Martin Seligman, who's the author of Authentic Happiness and a researcher, he describes happiness as having these three parts, and I thought that was interesting to look at: pleasure, engagement, and meaning. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think if we're going to cultivate happiness, we have to know what we're talking about. So as he's pointing out, he's really looking at it in three pieces. So not that happiness is any one of those things, but the three pieces you mentioned, what was that? Pleasure, engagement,
and meaning.
So collectively as a whole, he's really defining happiness in this integrated effort of, what is pleasurable, what are my experiences? When you're looking at engagement, that's probably how am I living my life and what are the activities I'm participating in, and then meaning and higher purpose. Now, did he weight any of those as more important?
Yeah, it's interesting to note that he makes this clear point that it's engagement and meaning in one's life, more focus on those, that really brings you to a happier place. And, you know, it's interesting in our own lives to ask the question, where do we put our focus? And do we put it all on the pleasure? Or, you know, how are we balanced in our lives?
Yeah, balance seems to be a key, right? Everyone says, I need to be more balanced in life.
That's right.
And what's that really mean? Going back to this idea that there's three parts, and again, this is just one definition of many, and people are really working with different views on happiness. I do think that when you start looking at happiness as a much more integrated, holistic approach, then it's this or it's that, it's pleasure or it's meaning or it's engagement, a much richer purpose in life seems to be manifesting in all of those. And but all too often, right, when we want to be happy, we focus on pleasure.
It's true. It is the go-to thing, isn't it?
Yeah, everybody wants to wake up and feel good, right? That's
right. You know, and there's another definition. I just want to throw this in here as well. There's a researcher, Sonia Lubomirsky, who talks about happiness as something that is the experience of joy, contentment, or positive well-being, combined with a sense that one's life is good and meaningful and worthwhile. And I think it's interesting that, you know, our common thought when we think of happiness is that pleasure, that joy piece. But we need to think about looking at what makes our life meaningful and worthwhile.
Yeah, all too often you sit there and you think about, I want more joy, I want more good feelings, and but as she's pointing out, meaning is again integral, as well as with the first definition, when we think about meaning in our life. Oftentimes we find that just the joy itself, the pleasure itself, is at odds with meaning and purpose. You know, we can do things to feel good, but it's actually going against our basic ethics and values and our meaning in life, which actually leads to depression and being self-critical. And one of the things that I know has been just predominant in our culture is the stress and anxiety and fear that comes from the fast-paced life that we have. And I think that really comes down to not remembering, not taking the time to ask ourselves, what's meaningful in my life, what's important.
Right. And also we find that, you know, when we do things that aren't in alignment with those things that we do find valuable or meaningful, then we don't feel good. We don't have that happiness. But conversely, you know, if you look at your life and you think about the times where you really were in alignment with what you value and what you feel is important, it really does bring not only a temporary happiness that right at that point, but also a very long-lasting happiness, which I think we'll get into more.
Yeah, you're touching on this idea of a genuine lasting happiness versus sort of a stimulus-driven pleasure, and that one is fleeting and one is much more substantial.
Yeah.
Yeah, it brings to mind a quote I saw at a monastery in India. That was great. They had these, at the school, they had all these quotes that would be all over, and one of them was, "The search for happiness is often the source of much unhappiness."
Right, right.
And that basic human desire, and I really believe, you know, when we talked about doing this show, we really wanted to address this quest of happiness because it is so much at the core of our lives. Nobody wakes up and says, you know, I want to feel miserable today. Everyone wakes up with the idea of, you know, I want to find some happiness in my life. And I know that in our work with mindfulness, we've really seen how our intuitive process towards that, our movement towards happiness, is actually taking us in the wrong direction. It's almost as though I want to be happy and I'm doing everything in my life to create suffering.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting to think about you know, what those go-to things are. You know, having a glass of wine, or you know, doing the things that sometimes also you know, we're just blind to some of the things that it brings as well.
Yeah, the quest for feeling good. And I think that becomes the problem. So when we're really bringing up this definition, happiness is not really just about feeling good. Feeling good and the quest for feeling good creates a lot of suffering. And I was fascinated when I would travel with monks, and as you're aware, and our viewers may not be, I spent 6 years of my life as a Buddhist monk, and we would travel the United States, and I would travel with these monks who live in a refugee settlement in the south of India, and we only have electricity maybe half a day when we have it. A real simple lifestyle. And they'd come here, they'd come to places like Aspen and travel the U.S., and they would see that we have all these incredible resources. We have climate control. We've got the fancy bed cushions that you can make this one higher than that one, or this one softer than that one. We have all this luxury, and yet we have much more suffering than they do. That we have much more stress. We have the depression. One recent study said that 78% of all hospitalizations are directly related to stress and anxiety, and yet we have all these luxury items which are supposed to make us feel better.
Right, right. And we're bombarded too with advertising that tells us, if you buy this, if you have this, if you live this lifestyle, if you go on this vacation, that is what's going to make you happy. And often, as we've talked about, you go on that vacation and it might be miserable, or you get back and you think that should have done it, and you get home and the same feelings of anger or jealousy or those difficult emotions come right back.
Right, the vacation of a lifetime.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I had a vacation of a lifetime. It was my dream vacation, and I have it. And it was wonderful, and yet a year later, I'm still subject to being depressed, unhappy, and that's weird. I had the vacation of a lifetime. Why am I not happy?
Right.
And when you sit there and think about these moments of happiness, these pleasurable experiences, you mentioned earlier that when we participate them, and they are connected more to our values, connected to that deeper meaning, which comes back to both those definitions. They tied in meaning and purpose into the pleasurable experiences. It seems that that's going to be a driving force for a higher level of happiness. Yeah. Now, as we looked at the scientific view, I know that we've also discussed some other researchers and some different views on happiness.
Yes, and one that I really wanted to bring in was Matthew Ricard, and I know you're so familiar with his work. You might actually want to give a little introduction to who he is before I read his definition.
Right, Matthew Ricard, a Buddhist monk and happiness researcher, some people call, and that's, I think, in context, often called the happiest man on earth. And really, when they talk about his level of happiness, we go back to what His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama would say, is that really the sole purpose and meaning of life is to be happy. But when he's using the word happiness, he's talking in a much deeper level, and I think that's what we're going to get into here.
I think so, yeah. He's talking about happiness and well-being as something that's not just a pleasurable sensation, but this deep sense of serenity and fulfillment that pervades and underlies all the emotional states that can come one's way, which is a little bit different than the definition we were just talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little richer, but it still, I think, has those same components, right? And so when he's talking about this level of happiness as serenity and contentment, a level of well-being that pervades all aspects of our life, what he's bringing up is the difference between stimulus-driven pleasure, right? This feels good in this moment. And we know that things that feel good are very temporary and ephemeral. They come and they go. And the analogies that are pretty common, I like chocolate cream pie. I know you know that.
Yes.
And when I eat chocolate cream pie, it's delicious, it's wonderful, the first piece. The second piece, not as good. And the third piece, not so fun at all.
Yeah.
And so the stimulus-driven pleasure, these moments that will come and go that are just experiences that we have that are fleeting, and they change, they're transitory. And the analogy he'll use, and actually he has a TED Talk called Habits of Happiness, which is one of the reasons I really thought about what we could bring in alignment with that, is the idea of this happiness being much more like the depth of an ocean.
Yes.
Right? So it's a very common Buddhist analogy that my well-being and inner peace is like the depth of the ocean, and the waves of the ocean, the feelings, the emotions of life, the challenges, the ups and downs, they come and they go, but the depth is this untouched by all the ups and downs, and there's a much richer sense of well-being, contentment, serenity, even in times that are challenging.
Yeah, I was going to say, it does remind me, when you look at someone's life who has had many, many challenges, someone else might, just really go down hard with the kind of challenges that this person's dealing with, but they manage, and they continue to have a sense of meaning in their life and worthiness. There's an interesting, picture going on. They really still find life valuable, and they're moving through with some sense of well-being, despite the fact that challenges are going on in their life. Sometimes hard to imagine types of challenges.
No, absolutely. You can take those examples everywhere, and people talk about the person who's living in a little hut in a refugee settlement who seems to have a lot of happiness, and a person in a $12 million home with very little happiness. And we do start to realize that the circumstances, the temporary events, aren't the things that ultimately impact that. And I know that in our next show we're going to really unpack that process.
Right.
But when we're thinking about the essence of happiness and this definition, when Matthieu Ricard or His Holiness the Dalai Lama is talking about, he's talking about this sense of inner peace and well-being. The eudaimonia, I think, is the Greek word for it.
Right.
An inner flourishing. And in that sense, the idea is that my well-being and inner peace is much richer than my emotions that come and go. That even in challenging events, I know that I'm going to be okay. There's a sense of acceptance to situations and the ability to be resilient to things as they come and go, that I'm going to be okay. And Thich Nhat Hanh, another Buddhist monk, he makes the point that if we were giddy and happy all the time, our nervous system would give up on us, that there's no peace and calm in that, while it's good and it serves a purpose and it's meaningful, that level of bubbling joy is not sustainable, it's not healthy, it's not well. But this rich sense of inner peace, sometimes people will even talk about bliss, but even on just a basic level of being okay, that I'm okay, that I'm well. I really think that that's this level of happiness that we really want to talk about and encourage.
And that's really not the message we get in our culture, is it? We look at advertising, we look at what's put in front of us as the road to happiness, and that's not quite what we're hearing.
Right. It brings up the old adage, which we've all heard, and it doesn't take a scientist to know about, is that happiness is an inside job. And Grandma Jones can tell you that. However, what she doesn't tell you is what's that mean?
Right.
What's that mean? And I know that as we designed and talked about the show, we really talked about having a program that is going to really give people tangible and practical ways of understanding what that means. What is it when we say happiness is an inside job? And how can we achieve this? And do we need to achieve it, or is it already there?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I know that that's something you brought up earlier, was the idea that happiness and cultivating genuine happiness, this well-being, is a skill.
That's true. And, I don't think that's sometimes not something we think of, but happiness, well-being is really something that we can learn to cultivate more of in our life. And, I'll bring up one other quote. This is something that they're finding in current research as well. Richard Davison, another great researcher from the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds, he points out there's fundamentally no difference between well-being and learning to play a musical instrument. If you practice, you'll get better at both. So something that, yeah, and that's why our show, I think, is going to look at practical tools and tips and things that we can offer people.
Right. That reminds me, at the end of each show, we want to make sure to offer one very practical tip and a method to cultivate that happiness. So we'll remember that at the end.
That's right.
So when we're coming back now to the idea of happiness, everyone wants it. Mm-hmm. And yet, how often do people really ask themselves, what is happiness? And more importantly, how do I really achieve it? So if I'm going to develop these skills, I need to understand what it is that I want to achieve or have or experience. There's some questions about whether we actually achieve happiness or whether it's already there, and we're just cluttering and mucking it up a bit.
Right, right. And, there's also the term that we tend to look for happiness in all the wrong places.
Yeah, sounds like a good country song.
It does. And I think that's something, I know that we'll unfold with throughout different episodes of this show. But it is true. We tend to, look at, sort of short-term pleasure and miss sometimes the longer term and the deeper meaning of happiness and what will really be sustaining and that foundational serenity and well-being.
Right. So the confusion being that, again, not really understanding what happiness really is and mistaking the idea of temporary pleasure for this sense of happiness and this short-sightedness. So I think that when we wrap up or look at trying to tie together all these definitions of happiness that we've talked about pleasurable experience, clearly that's a part. Our engagement in the world, how we live our lives.
Family, work, all those relationships.
Right, and then the meaning, right, the purpose is my life meaningful? Is it add to, and is it beneficial to the world? And I think that when we start wrapping those together, that unfolds into what Matthew Ricard, His Holiness the Dalai Lamas, and one of my teachers, Alan Wallace, talks about in this inner flourishing, this sense of well-being and inner peace, that we actually have this reservoir, that it's already here in the sense that if I take myself out of all of this worry, fear, anxiety, and all the projections of my mind, what we find is when I'm not thinking, when I'm not caught up in rumination, there's a sense of well-being and inner peace that's already there. It's always there. And that's when this sort of happiness is an inside job. We start thinking and understanding that I don't need to go anywhere. I don't need to achieve anything.
I don't need to buy anything. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
And that this sense of well-being gets cluttered up by, as I think you were referencing, behaviors and activities which are not really necessarily in alignment with the way I want to live my life, with the meaning in my life, and the way I want to show up with the people in my life.
Yeah. And I think we all know examples of people, that we look to and think, wow, they're a great example of what that looks like. I have some friends myself, it's a couple, who are a great example in that, they really demonstrate the joy and the appreciation, the gratitude of all the things in their life. And you can really also see them living in alignment with their values, what they find meaningful, both with their children and in their work and now their retirement. And there's also an element of giving back, which I think is an important piece we can talk about, as we go on.
Yeah, well, giving back, I think, ties into meaning.
Absolutely, yeah.
So as we look at our opening program here, we really, I know, both wanted to unpack and really look at a definition of of happiness. And where I'm coming to through this discussion is the idea that happiness is much more than a pleasurable moment. Pleasurable moments are a part of it, but happiness is a sense of this inner peace and well-being, that I'm okay. And when you ask people in their life, are you happy? You know, they're not checking in to see if I'm feeling good in a moment. They tend to reflect on, yeah, my life seems pretty good.
That's
you know,
true.
yeah, my job's meaningful. I have good friends. I'm participating in things. And so that doesn't always calculate, though, when we wake up in the morning and say, hey, I want to be happy, right? We
Right.
wind up getting caught up in those little moments and forgetting, you know, the sort of longer view. And I think it comes back to delayed gratification, the same things we teach our kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if I really want to be happy in life, I think it really boils down to, I want to respond to and participate in the world in ways that are meaningful, that are in alignment with my values, that are going to ultimately allow me to look in the mirror, feel good about who I am, a life of integrity and clarity with the choices that I'm making. And it's much less tied to this pleasurable experience or this difficult experience, that if I respond to the difficult experience in a way that's meaningful, I'm actually have the opportunity to cultivate happiness in something that is not at all happy.
And have that be a long-lasting feeling. Yeah.
And have that be a long-lasting thing. Because
Yeah.
every time you look back at it, you're going to feel good about how you showed up in that situation. All right. Well, that's wonderful. I know that we're coming to the end of the show, and I did want to make sure that we offered that habit of happiness.
Yes.
So we do invite all of you to cultivate the skill this week. I think we're going to choose gratitude. Studies have shown that if I call to mind and just make a list every day of a few things I'm grateful for, just my level of well-being improves on that simple task. Because when I'm thinking about what I'm grateful for, I'm not thinking about what I don't have. I'm thinking about what I do have. So our tip for this week is to really invite you to, when you wake up in the morning, take a little time to write down 5 things that you feel grateful for, things that you appreciate in your life, and then before you go to bed, 5 more. So let's try that for a week and see if that doesn't cultivate a little sense of well-being and happiness in your own life. And from Laura and myself, we do thank you for sharing this time with us today, and we wish you much happiness and well-being.
Habits of Happiness is sponsored and hosted by the Mindful Life program. The Mindful Life program helps people engage in life in healthy and meaningful ways, reducing stress while cultivating genuine happiness. They offer programs locally, internationally, and online. More information at www.mindfullifeprogram.org or 970-633-0163.
Habits of Happiness is also sponsored by Paradise Bakery, located in the heart of Aspen on the corner of Galena and Cooper. A favorite hangout since 1981. Famous for fresh-baked cookies and muffins, serving homemade Italian-style ice cream, lattes, and fine coffees. Open daily from 6:30 a.m. to 11 p.m.